Well, for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Julie Wendt. I'm a licensed nutritionist, and I have two wonderful girls at the school. Ayla is in 7th grade, and Emma is a senior. So we've been around for many years, and it's really my pleasure to give back to you guys in any way that I can. So please know that I'm a resource for you during this hour together, but also if there's anything you need in the future, you have questions, always available to help. All right. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about stress and trying to focus it around the health habits that we can cultivate that will help us manage stress. So one of the things that we can all appreciate is how our stress response varies, maybe from individual to individual, but also through different parts of our lives or different parts of our days. And that's because how stress impacts us is dependent on where we're at, what level of nourishment we have. Nourishment meaning not just food, but are we well rested? Do we feel grounded? Those types of things really provide nourishment and allow our bodies to come into really nice balance. So, some of us may look at this picture of skydivers and feel like that looks like a really great idea, and others can, start to feel their stomach flip because that's not, some kind of stress that would be welcome. So when we think about stress, I really want to sort of frame our discussion today with this idea that stress is around us. The person that sort of coined the phrase acknowledges that it's sort of like the water to a fish. It's like around us and we know it's there, but it's kind of hard to define. And depending, you can look up different definitions and they will depend on sort of the perspective, right? So stress, when you're talking about construction, is a little bit different than when you're talking about what happens in your body when you do different activities like weightlifting or running, right? So those are stressors on your body, and it kind of means something different. So acknowledging that stress is around us and it's actually very much a part of how our bodies are designed in terms of using forces of stress to grow stronger, whether it be physically, mentally, emotionally. Our biochemistry is very much designed around reacting to stress in a way where we build up and we build better. So I want to think about that as we have our discussion, because I think the way we approach stress and think about it in our mindset around it is important to consider. All right. When I was thinking about how to organize this discussion today, I thought about how to group the topics I wanted to cover. So we're going to touch on genetics and think about how is it that our bioindividuality play into how we feel and how we react. We're definitely going to talk about foods, our lifestyle. You guys know me enough now to know that I'm always going to come back to those foundational habits that make our body work really well, and it shows up in how our stress response is as well. And then I definitely want to talk about some obstacles, because I want to leave you guys with not just more ideas, but also some concrete, specific recommendations that you want to consider. And I also put together a little 1 or 2 pager on magnesium, a little handout for you guys to have, and I will send that to Patty afterwards. All right, so here we go. We want to, when we talk about stress, sometimes it can make us feel a little more stressed. So just getting into that space of slowing down, giving ourselves some time right now to reflect on where we're at and things that we might do to improve the way we're handling some of the specific stress in this particular moment is super intense. But, you know, the reality is stress is all around us all the time. And it's more about how you carry that stress than what the stress is. Okay, so let's start talking about genetics. It's a very important piece of how I work with people in terms of trying to personalize my recommendations. And it is definitely the future of medicine. So genetics plays a really big role in how our body works at a specific level that I don't want to get too technical, but just to give you a sense that we have little tiny variations. They would not be considered mutations. They're just little tiny changes in one nucleotide in our genome. And that little change will have a slight alteration in how whatever that is coding for works. So sometimes it will be an enzyme. Maybe it'll make that enzyme work a little better, or maybe it'll work a little worse. And generally, it's nothing that would be life-threatening. It would just play into some of the ways that we may need to adjust our diet and lifestyle so that our body can work the best, right? So this is some of the bio-individuality we see between some people doing some types of lifestyle habits that work for them, but maybe you've tried them and they're like, no, that's not really good. So some of that is related to how we're designed. So there are some very specific SNPs that are related to our stress response and may explain why some people feel like they're more easily stressed out, that, you know, they're taking things in a way that maybe they don't see other people taking, or maybe they just for some reason feel like they should not be taking as seriously and have it affect them so much. So the interesting thing and how this ties in is that there are ways that we can support our genetics that are pretty easy, that can really have a big impact in what our threshold is for feeling stressed out. So some of that is going to play into certain types of nutrients. So these are going to be the cofactors that work with our enzymes to help process different neurotransmitters that are those chemical messengers that make up our stress response. And some of the lifestyle things that we might need to do specifically in order to feel less stressed. And then it also will dictate how we feel with stimulants, whether or not coffee is really a good idea. All right, let's talk a little bit about foods and how we can adjust what we're eating to help our stress response. And some of that will be linked back to those genetics we just talked about. Okay, so we're always going to start with this desire to optimize our diet. And the reason why we come back to a time and again this idea of an anti-inflammatory diet is because inflammation is a very big input for a lot of the things that might be concerns for our health. So chronic disease is often, estimates say, about 60% of those chronic disease are going to be made worse through inflammation. And it's probably higher than that, because inflammation creates this environment for your body that dictates where and how the chemical messengers are working. So one way to support your stress response, and this can be difficult because these are generally not the foods we're going to crave when we're stressed out. So this is definitely a preventative tool, is to think about how our day-to-day food choices can really help us be nourished and avoid kind of feelings of overwhelm. So I've talked about inflammation and an anti-inflammatory diet before, and I wonder if you guys have ideas about what that means to you when I say anti-inflammatory diet. Does anybody have any thoughts? Well, let me see my chat. Okay, yes, Sally, low white sugar. Definitely. And processed foods, yep. So the further things get away from what they actually were like when they were growing, there are degrees of processing. So ideal is whole foods, because those are going to retain so much more of your nutrients. But also, you know, there's whole grains and whole grain products, and those are processed, but less so. So great, having lots of vegetables, fruits, and fiber, 100%. Low FODMAP foods, that's an interesting, yeah. So if you've got an overgrowth of bacteria, which is a little bit of a dysfunction, like that's not how we're supposed to be, then those higher FODMAP foods would be inflammatory to you. And our goal would be to get rid of that bacteria in your small intestine so that you can eat those fantastic foods. So yes, so there, and that raises a really great point, which is food sensitivities, right? So something might be inflammatory for me because of how I'm built, or you know, my health history, that is actually a very healthy food. Like nightshades are a great example. Nightshades, super nutrient dense, and yet at the same time, for some people, particularly with pain syndromes, nightshades can really trigger inflammation for them. So it's situationally, foods can be inflammatory or not. Great. All right, I'm gonna keep my chat open. Thank you guys for that input. Is there a correlation with eczema? Yes. So whenever we have anything going on in our gut, it can very easily show up on our skin. A lot of food sensitivities related to eczema. Yeah. And sometimes how we process particular types of fats can create more susceptibility. So it can be a little bit of a genetic link there. If you don't have the enzymes to convert these particular fats, sometimes that can contribute. Great. All right, let's talk about things. I'm wondering, can you guys still see my whole screen if I have the chat up?
Yes, I can.
Yes, okay, perfect. All right, so here are some particular stress fighting foods, and sometimes I shy away from putting foods in categories like this and calling them stress fighting, because I don't know, that feels a little bit like marketing to me, but really what we're saying is here are some particularly therapeutic foods that are going to help with different aspects of regulating your stress response. Okay, so probably the most direct relationship between stress and food would be our magnesium containing foods. Um, and magnesium is definitely my go-to mineral for everything needing to be calmed down. I kind of feel like we should put this in the water supply in the DC metro area because it's so magical. Just sort of takes the edge off. And there's a reason for that, which somewhat relates to sometimes how our genetics are. So some people, they will have a certain inability to break down neurotransmitters. So their enzyme doesn't work so great. And magnesium is a cofactor for that enzyme. And so by providing more of the cofactor, it helps that enzyme work even better. So those people would be a little more sensitive to magnesium deficiencies, which are actually quite common, in part because not everybody is eating nuts and seeds and spinach and black beans, but also because our soil is not like it used to be in terms of nutrient density. So if we don't have rich soil, the food that's grown in there is not going to be as nutrient dense. So the good news on this is that dark chocolate is a high magnesium food. So, sometimes life does really make sense. And this is one of those. So, fiber is something that came up in terms of one of our anti-inflammatory food components. And that's primarily due to this relationship between our gut and our brain. So we have a very close relationship. We have something to think of as a very direct line between our gut and our brain called the vagus nerve. And when we see improvements in gut health, a lot of times mood will also improve. And that is very much related to what we now know, all of the things that are produced in your gut, primarily by those beneficial bacteria, the microbiome. And so the healthier that is, the more balance you're going to have. About 80% of our serotonin is produced in our gut by our gut bacteria and then shuttled up to the brain rather than vice versa like we thought. So as you can imagine, if things are unhappy in the gut, then things like serotonin are not going to be produced and it's going to have an impact on our mood. So fiber is your preferred food of the microbiome. So these beneficial bacteria are down there waiting for fibers that we can't digest, but they just go to town on. And in the process, they create vitamins and minerals and special anti-inflammatory fats that we use throughout our body. So fiber is really important. And if you're eating a whole foods-based diet, you're generally going to be in good shape. And it's very easy to add a fiber supplement if you tend to find yourself a little bit low. Healthy fats are, again, kind of the answer to most of our questions in terms of what kinds of foods will help us feel better. And in part, healthy fat is important for us because in our normal day-to-day, the American diet tends to be really high in omega-6 fats, which are part of what drives our inflammatory cycles. So it is a necessary component. But a lot of times we need to work a little harder to balance that high intake of omega-6 with ample intake of omega-3, which is going to help us with our anti-inflammatory cascades. So healthy fats, ideally, if they are replacing omega-6 type of fats, which we're going to get from processed foods. Refined vegetable oils will be high in omega-6. Overconsumption of that type of thing leads to that sort of foundation in a bad way for inflammation in the body. And when we have inflammation in the body, it's going to show up in our brain and then impact our mood, our ability to deal with the stressors of the day. Okay, so healthy fats, I've listed here animal sources, and olives, of course, are not animal, but there are other sources of healthy fats that you will get from nuts and seeds. But I listed these because they're primarily what we think of for healthy fats. The other types of non-animal omega-3s require a conversion that doesn't work super well. The efficiency is it's less than 10% for people. So, if stress feels like overwhelming, getting more support, you might want to go with some healthy animal fat sources if that fits in with your diet approach. Again, with the probiotics, we're targeting that microbiome. We're trying to, on a regular daily basis, tend to our microbiome. And if you think about making your food choices more so based on what would feed these really important bacteria in your GI tract, then your food choices start to shift pretty quickly. And any kind of probiotic rich food is going to be helpful. Okay, now folate, the interesting thing about folate is sort of this correlation with people that had reports of depression and anxiety tended to be deficient in folate. So, research can be difficult to really fully understand how to apply it, but the takeaway from this research was, let's make sure we're not folate deficient, because we see this really strong association. And, sometimes we don't know if it's correlation or causation. If your mood is not in good balance, then you maybe tend to not eat as well. And maybe that's why, right, you're folate deficient. But either way, it is part of, that anti-inflammatory diet is going to be really rich in folate. When I think of folate, I always think of foliage, leafy greens. That's always a great spot to get them from. But actually, number one food to hit this out of the ballpark with is beef liver. So for those of you who are open to that, it's like nature's multivitamin. It's a very nutrient dense food. And lastly, antioxidants. So all of our plant foods are going to be a great option in terms of antioxidants. There are some that are higher in antioxidants than others. I've listed the top ones here, but I would be thrilled with any kind of colorful fruit or vegetable. It's going to give you a signal that you're providing your body with some very specific support in combating, going back to this idea of inflammation, and how, particularly if we're stressed, we can tend to go through our vitamins and minerals a little faster. And as our metabolism works, we create oxidants, and which is very normal, and part of our body's plan is to always have ample supply of antioxidants to mitigate and help the body get rid of those. And so when we have a diet that's rich in colorful fruits and vegetables, we can meet that demand. But if we tend towards, fewer servings of fruits and vegetables a day, or more processed foods, then a lot of times it can create more oxidative stress, which causes inflammation, which can make it more difficult to really feel balanced in the face of some of the stressors we have. Okay, so there are foods that can make it harder for us to feel good in our stress response. And some of this is also related to how we're built in terms of our genetics. Some people break down caffeine very quickly. Others are slow metabolizers and can be affected by that stimulant, for 11, 12 hours. So I'm always encouraging you guys to tune into yourself and pay attention to how your body reacts to these different things. There is tons of research about coffee being a fantastic source of antioxidants, and there's a correlation with lower colon cancer risk in coffee drinkers because of that. However, depending on how you're built, it may or may not work for you in terms of your stress response. So be open to listening to your body um, and seeing, how does this really affect me? And is there another option? Green and black tea both also have caffeine. It's much smaller amount than coffee. Green tea is interesting. It's usually part of our therapeutic food lists, our anti-inflammatory food lists, because of the antioxidant levels in there. And green tea has a particular amino acid called L-theanine, which helps create kind of a calm feeling. So some supplements that you might see on the shelf for relaxation may have L-theanine in it, and that is something you would get from green tea. So green, a lot of these foods, there's nothing necessarily wrong with them. They can be very healthy. It just depends on you, as the individual, and asks you to kind of tune in and develop what works for you, and know that I've seen this in my life. Things change, right? I used to tolerate something and now I don't, or vice versa. So other things, like if you tend to be sensitive to stimulants, any kind of energy drink is probably not going to feel good. Be careful with certain herbs. Unfortunately, chocolate can fall into this in terms of being a stimulant, and can cause people to feel racing heart and things like that. And activated B vitamins. So if you're taking a multivitamin, there are lots of different types, right? And sometimes the higher quality vitamins will have activated B vitamins, meaning it doesn't require any of your enzymes in order to convert that vitamin into its active form, which is great if you have certain genetic SNPs that create inefficiencies, like MTHFR, if any of you have heard of that, is a great example, where you don't convert folate from foods into the active form. And that can create very specific health issues. And so that's the person that is going to benefit from receiving these activated vitamins, because you don't need your enzyme, because the enzyme doesn't work so great. However, some people can sometimes experience anxious thoughts or racing heart related to activated B vitamins, and it's because of their specific biochemistry. So I put that in there just to keep in mind, if you are taking vitamins, that sometimes that can rev people up too much, right? And then some other things to consider. So we have high glycemic foods. So if and when we are experiencing a blood sugar drop, we can feel anxious and stressed. Hangry, I guess, is more of a common way of describing it. But, and sometimes we're not realizing that's happening, but all of a sudden we're feeling anxious. And if you track back and think about, oh, I've had a super busy day and all I had to eat was coffee this morning and then a donut at break, and then you're feeling like anxious and overwhelmed, you know, if we had a redo on that day and I gave you, you know, a really nice high protein breakfast and you had, you know, a beautiful salad with lots of veggies for lunch, I would put some money that your stress response would be very different in the afternoon. So thinking about that, especially as teachers, you guys are on the spot all day long. How are you filling up your gas tank and preparing your body for the day so that your stress response and your sense of overwhelm is supported, right? So high glycemic foods can do that, create that effect. And that's an easy one to fix. Well, sort of easy. We'll get to that as part of our obstacles later. Um, Taurine is a amino acid that you'll see in some energy drinks. It's something that we think of for energy because of how it supports our energy cycle. And sometimes if you're sensitive, that can create this feeling. It sort of revs people up too much. We already touched on this, the food sensitivities. Um, and when we were talking about an anti-inflammatory diet. So if you're reacting to a food as a sensitivity, which is different than an allergy, a sensitivity can show up 1 to 3 days after you've eaten that food. And basically what's happening is that your body is mounting an inflammatory response to that food. And it shows up in various ways. For some people, it's fatigue, joint pain, brain fog, like it can show up different ways. Some people, it makes them anxious. I've had people take gluten or eggs out of their diet and report, you know, a big change in their levels of anxiety and how they feel, their ability to sleep and things like that. So, um, so that can be, if, you know, that can be something to think about as an elimination diet if you want to know, you know, whether or not there are certain foods that you might be sensitive to. And then artificial sweeteners, in part due to their role with inflammation. Okay, so as we can, we want to avoid the artificial sweeteners. A different caveat for some of our natural no calorie sweeteners like stevia and monk fruit, haven't seen research that shows that same inflammatory response, in part because they're more natural plant-based compounds. So that might be a case where we can have our cake and eat it too. In terms of, you know, reducing our sugar intake, but still getting something that tastes a little sweet. All right. So now this is the hard part, the lifestyle, right? So what can we do lifestyle wise to support our resiliency and our ability to manage the stressors of the day? I hope you guys are feeling a theme here. Big proponent for the exercise. I am so flexible on whatever the exercise is. It matters less about that and more that it's happening. And ideally that it's something you enjoy. So exercise generally makes everything better, rule of thumb. And to the extent that you can carve out time in your schedule for regular exercise, you will notice a big impact on your stress resiliency. You know, to think about it, I've been talking a lot about these neurotransmitters and how for some of us, they hang around in our synapses a little longer than others, right? And that creates this stress response that's a little more to the surface. So these are the types of people that exercise can really help burn up those neurotransmitters and feel like a good run or bike ride or whatever it is really helps them de-stress, and that's part of the link. It also just in general is going to reduce inflammation through that same pathway that I discussed, where we're stressing the body and it's getting stronger, right? Stronger in different ways, whether it's building muscle tissue or um, creating more anti-inflammatory response. That's a way to get stronger. So a plug for the exercise, and sort of on the other hand, the rejuvenation, right? So taking time out for prayer and meditation is a very powerful way to reset your nervous system. And, there are biochemical changes that are going to be happening in your body that makes stress feel different. There are changes that happen in your gut. No surprise there. And it's just, you can see that, different parts of your brain are activated. And for people who have a regular practice, um, these techniques help reduce the amygdala, which is sort of the trying to protect us, but it is the seat of our stress response. And that can get smaller through this practice. And the areas of our brain in charge of creative problem solving and, regulating our emotions, all of those are more activated and get stronger, right? So rejuvenation, it really matters less, again, like what the particular flavor of it is. What matters is on a regular basis, you're taking that time out to just send your nervous system this really strong message, like everything is really okay. We're good, right? So a lot of this stress is emotional, um, and we just need to let our nervous system know, because it's really not designed for the type of low grade chronic stress that we experience. And then another favorite is the sleep. So it's hard to be our best and have our body work if we're not coming in with some good sleep. A little bit of a mystery around what happens when we sleep, but we just know that it changes how your body works, and particularly for supporting your mood, it's a critical component. So again, these things are foundational because they're all so important to optimizing how your body works. And really, without tending to each of them, we're going to possibly not feel the best that we can. Okay, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time recognizing that it can be hard to do some of these things that we've talked about. Changing your diet, um, eating in a whole foods based approach takes time, right? It takes time to make that happen, and most of us feel like we don't have any. Um, so let's spend a little bit of time thinking about what makes it hard to make some of these adjustments that you've probably heard as a recommendation, if not from me, from any, time you're in the grocery store and see something on the front of a magazine, right? So um, we want to think about what are some things. I need you to think about this personally, and you guys can certainly share in the chat if you feel compelled. What makes it hard to eat healthy? You guys have a lot of knowledge and information around what that means, and yet it can be difficult, right? Even for me, who I've made this my career, it's hard. It's hard to find time and to keep doing it, but when I do make those efforts, I always feel so much better. So what I hear from a lot of people and experience myself, our hurdles can be around not having a plan, right? So I have circumvented this a little bit with, I use emails, which is just giving me recipes in my, they have an app, but basically each week there's a whole meal plan and you can choose different ways of eating, Mediterranean, heart healthy, paleo, vegetarian, etc. And then they have recipes. So um, that's, to me, game changer. Happy to go get the food and cook it, but for me to spend extra time planning and gathering recipes, it just is overwhelming. So there's different ways of providing a plan. You can pay a little bit of money and get support with the plan, or you can find time in your schedule to make a plan. But if you don't have a plan, healthy eating is very difficult to make happen. Um, time time is usually a big thing in terms of being able to eat healthy the way we want to. So then I'm going to go back to when we make a plan, we save ourselves a lot of time, let alone stress about what actually we're going to put on the table. But also, this is a place for you to think about where you might need help, right? Like, we don't necessarily have to do everything all by ourselves. What are some obstacles that you think you could get help with, either from your family members or from a service, right? So Instacart is a great example where a lot of people, they've got their plan together. They don't have the time to get to the store. So they use Instacart and maybe they pay a little bit more for that service, but it makes it work, right? So there's varying degrees of this. I have some people that they're very busy professionals and they want to eat well and they hire somebody to cook their food for them. And that's sort of on the extreme side of it, but that's an option, right? So this is about recruiting resources to help you make it happen. A smaller example would be, which for me is a big thing to overcome, buying already chopped up food. Like I don't know why that feels so indulgent to me because I feel, but like you can really put together a healthy, quick meal if you buy the onions and peppers and mushrooms already sliced up and you just pop them in the pan, right? So being open to things that can save you time and help you eat the way that you feel your best. Um, and then confusion. So hopefully, um, I have helped alleviate some confusion if you have any around food. But that's part of why I went to get a master's degree in nutrition because I was confused about what to eat. And when you're in that state of confusion, it can sometimes feel hard to know and then act on anything because it's all vague and confusing. So I would just recommend you're never going to go wrong with just going back to whole foods, simple foods, you know, and there's literally no food that hasn't been demonized by somebody for something. Just know that for the most part, most of us, just whole foods, lots of fruits and vegetables, healthy fats, good protein, that's going to make us feel amazing. We don't have to get into advanced therapeutic diets for the most part. Okay, so um, okay, yeah, so things can change, right? So you best laid plans and then things change. And that's where I tend to have like a backup. Like I'm not usually eating frozen foods, but I will have a healthy-ish version of something frozen that maybe I'm not going to be home and somebody else will make, or we only have a certain amount of time. But contingency planning, because life is about unexpected things happening. And as you get into this rhythm of preparing your foods and having a good assortment in the fridge and in the pantry, it can feel more manageable to try to navigate. And then also thinking about maybe ahead of time, where are your go-to healthy eating out places, right? So eating out can look very different, and there's some fantastic options in this area. Pretty quick food like kava, and variations on that theme where you can get a decent anti-inflammatory meal in a pinch if you end up eating out. Oh, family pressure to eat comfort food. Yes, I hear that. And depending on how you have your your structure in place, I'm promoting the offering of a nutritious meal. And if people want other things, they are welcome to make them themselves. And I also think about, so food preference, right? Some of the kids like things raw, some of them like them cooked. So trying to have that assortment so that it's not always stuff that is egregious to some of the other people in the house. And then thinking about comfort foods and how to make them a little healthier. I'm not like a big fan of sneaking vegetables into things like brownies, but some people, that works for them. And I guess some zucchini is better than none, right? So, but you can also think about trying to take some comfort foods and either having like a fantastic salad on the side that you could eat more of, and family members could eat less of, but um, thinking about and trying to educate around the food choices and why things are being offered. It's an important lesson, and I know the kids generally are going to take it or leave it, but I'm hopeful, and I have been told that as they reach adulthood, they will go back to that understanding of how they were raised and the foods that were offered, right? So I hold out hope for that in my own house. Yeah, Patty. So people want to eat differently, and I get that. And yet, um, anytime you're in that group team environment, um, navigating that is important because your needs aren't any less important than theirs. And there's definitely space for everybody to get what they want. And definitely if you're preparing the food, I think that gives you an extra bit of currency in terms of deciding what that is. Yeah, these are all, this is real, this is day-to-day real stuff that makes it hard. And I hope you guys will feel that if once you identify some of these obstacles, whether it be recruiting your family into problem solving or you kind of figuring out how to make it work, I think, it's doable. Good. Everybody is on board. Some chopped prepared veggies, game changer. Good. I was slow to the game on that, but once I got over myself, I'm happy, very happy. So I wanted to mention, if supplements are something in your world that would be helpful, these are my sort of go-tos, particularly around the stress response. Again, I'm going to give a good plug for magnesium. Want to be careful about what form you would be using. Glycinate is the best absorbed and can really help with that cofactor, that breaks down your stress hormones, neurotransmitters, so that you just generally everything, you take it down a couple notches. And it's very supportive and there's no real worries with it. Vitamin D, I'm putting this in here because if you do not know this, you will know it now. Please be on vitamin D for all things COVID prevention, okay? Everybody, you want vitamin D3. You want to take it with food because it's a fat soluble vitamin. And unless you know that you're not deficient, I would make the assumption that you are, because most people are. And it's okay to take 2 to 3,000 IU a day. There are tons and tons and tons of studies showing how people that have sufficient vitamin D levels, and also people who are admitted to ICU and receive large dose of vitamin D, they fare better in terms of what happens with their COVID disease. So vitamin D, I'm promoting for all of you for that purpose, but also vitamin D is one of those things that can be tricky to get through food. There's no great food sources. We get it through the sun and, exposure with our skin, which most of us, even in the summer, aren't getting as much, but definitely during the winter. And vitamin D is one of those vitamins that really shows up in a big way with inflammation and helping calm all of that. So I've listed some other herbs and of course, melatonin. If you feel like sleep is elusive, and I'm happy to talk about specific types with that. If anybody has questions, just email me because the type you take can matter. And that's it. So I hope you guys had take some good takeaways from our discussion. And let me see, how do... Oh, okay. So you can definitely, the question is, can we tell if we're deficient in these things? Vitamin D is something that you can test and is covered by insurance. And anytime you guys are getting your blood work done, have them tack on the vitamin D because you want to monitor that. Super, super helpful for immune health, bone health. It's one of those things that we do not want to be deficient in. Okay. And other vitamins, minerals, magnesium. There are some testing that you can do for those, but generally, unless you're at a very deficient state, it's not going to show up on your blood work because your body has a pretty tight rein on things in the blood to keep everything working, right? The very slight change can throw enzymes and things off. So things like vitamin B12, by the time it shows up as deficient in your blood, you've got like some serious issue happening. There are some functional tests that I can run that look at in your cells, measures of vitamin and mineral status. That's one way. Sometimes there are physical signs and symptoms. So little white spots in your nails can be a sign of zinc deficiency. Leg cramps, eye twitches can be magnesium deficiency. So it's not always as easy as just getting a blood test and then knowing. So you might have to play around with that. All right. Any other questions? I know a lot of you guys have to head out, and poor Patty's left without sound. I will be sending that magnesium guide to you for your entertainment, and hopefully you guys can get some fun out of that. And please reach out if you need anything, if there's anything I can do to support you. And thank you for everything you do for us.